Welcome to the Common Podcast, where we speak upon common sense and realize it really isn't that common. Ladies and gentlemen, today's topic, I'm so excited. It's a lot to tackle, and I think that we're going to have a lot of fun with this conversation. But before I do that, like I say in every podcast, if you found us on YouTube and it's more convenient, you can also find us on Spotify. That's going to be the Common Podcast. Same thing goes vice versa. If you found us on Spotify and you would like to see more of a visual where we are interacting and engaging, we are also on YouTube, which is the Common Podcast. And obviously, as you can see, if you're watching the video, this is another online podcast. This will be the last one for a while. I will be going back to face-to-face interactions after this one. But for this topic at hand, I wanted to get a special guest, a very long-time friend of mine, for this very difficult topic at hand, and that is, what is the meaning of life? Very complex, the million-dollar question. Centuries have gone by and nobody's been able to answer it, and that's what we're going to discuss right now. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Josh Garza, who is currently has his bachelor's in Christian education and will shortly be attaining his master's in ministry and theology. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Mr. Joshua.
Thank you again for having me. I'm super excited to be here and super excited to have everyone that's listening to this. So, yeah.
Well, like I explained in the intro, this is a very difficult conversation to have, a very complex and very broad question to have. So I think that we're going to have a difficult but a very common question to handle here, because I think every human being in existence has at one point asked themselves, what's the point of this? What's the point of this vicious cycle of life and death? Like, I'm born just to eventually die? Like, how malevolent is that? Like, how cruel is that? Why am I put on here just to die? Like, and then to see my family members die, and it's so, it can make someone so anxious just to think about, right? Just to think about life. If you sit down for a little bit and think about it, it's just like, oof, that's not something that I want to think about.
Yeah, well, and I think you're right. I mean, it's super understatement. Like, definitely one of the hardest questions to answer. And I don't know. I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about it. I think you're right. I think a lot of people ask this question. Typically, if they ask the question, they're like in a time of crisis, most likely. Maybe they're having an existential moment, or they're really realizing whether it's mortality or that they're like finite creatures. And so. Yeah, and then for most people, I think, there's another half to this, right? I don't think enough people even think about that at the same time. I think there's some people that are just like, no, bro, I'm just happy to just be alive. I'm just happy to be here. Like, well, I don't think, that chill person, like everyone knows that one chill guy or girl that's like, no, I didn't think that far. I'm just kind of taking it one day at a time.
Yeah, that just live in the moment type of person,
mm-hmm.
right? I was actually thinking about that a couple of days ago, and I feel like those people have at one point thought about it, but it's just too complex that they don't want to tackle that burden, and so they're like, you know what? It's just too much to take on. I'm just like, let me just live life in the moment and take it day by day, and so they try to alleviate the anxiety by let me just have fun with my life, right? Because it's a difficult and scary question or thing to handle. It really is.
For sure. Yeah, and I was thinking about that too. I was like, I think the other side, in those people that do think about it, I think the simple and like comforting answer, the comforting answer is, bro, just do what makes you happy. Mm-hmm. Just do whatever like makes it. Here's a quick spiel of like that I have. It is you ever seen like those like celebrities or those like athletes that like get like asked they might get like an interview question, or maybe they got a big premiere coming up or something, and they're like asking a really deep question. And how often do you hear, at least in some form or fashion, they say something like, "Yeah, just go and do what makes you happy," and that's all that's important. And all I think about is like how unchallenging is that question? Like that's a question that, like, no matter who you are, what your background is, or where you're from, like that is a very like satisfying uh, response to that. And then also, like, there's another side to that where, like, in like the grand scheme of like world history, like people have not like responded that way to that. Like within the past 2,000 years, maybe people like responded to that, but like prior to that, it was like no, like you just you don't worry about stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I actually don't believe that to be true. I think that happiness is a result, not so much of something that you should try to attain or like a goal, right? So, what I believe is that you should try to do what's meaningful. And then when you acquire the meaningfulness, then that will eventually lead to happiness, right? So, what I've learned is that if you shoot for happiness, you won't gain the meaning. But if you shoot for meaning, you will also gain the happiness. So I guess in Christian terms, you would be, would you try to attain happiness or try to accomplish your calling, right? And so what we find is that if you chase your calling, which that in itself is very difficult to, okay, well, what's my calling, right? That's something that you take a lifetime to figure out. But once you figure out, wait, this is my calling, it eventually leads into happiness. And it might not be something that you want, but maybe it's something that you need that you just haven't
Absolutely.
realized yet.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, and I think, how often, I mean, here's the truth is like at one moment, like my heart, we're talking about happiness. I'm going to kind of use like as an illustration for happiness, like what your heart wants, like, man, what the heart wants. Uh, but the thing is, like one moment my heart can want one thing, and like literally the next day, like my heart wants something else. And then also, who's not to say that the thing that I'm like desiring and I'm craving is even good for me? So what? It makes you happy, okay? But is it even something that's gonna edify you, that's gonna benefit you? And so I lean to the side of, of calling, um, that God for every single person has called everyone to do. And some of us, it's to be a great podcast host. Some of us, for those that don't know, that's on the podcast, I'm a youth pastor in Olson, Texas. It's in the Lubbock area. And, part of my job is I, present the gospel to students from seventh grade to seniors in high school. And I mean, literally all of them, they just want to have fun. They just want to have a good time. They want to talk without getting in trouble and things like that. But, it's a lot like one of the illustrations I have is it's like, our whether it's happiness or things like that. It's like a wild Mustang. It's like a horse that you can't like control, and you have to tame it. You have to get it under control. And then from there, you can find direction in so many different places. But if you're just going everywhere, you're missing out on a lot of wasted time, wasted energy. Um, I think there's another aspect to that where we just overcomplicate things. Um, but yeah.
Yeah. So in a topic that is so very broad and so complex, I would like to start with kind of like where I started in the beginning of the conversation, which is that vicious cycle of life and death, right? So I believe that life grants us and promises one thing from the day of birth, and that is suffering. That's what I truly believe. I don't believe that anything else is promised to us. I don't think happiness is promised to us. I believe that's an outcome. Time is not promised to us. Josh, do you know when you're gonna die? You don't know when you're
No
gonna die.
idea.
Yeah, time's not promised. Health, you have no idea. The body works and clicks in the correct way a million times every single day in order for you just to function. You never know when that's gonna go fault. You never know when you can get struck by plagues. You never know when any of these things. You never know when a family member is gonna pass away. You never know when horror is going to strike your life. None of these things are promised, but suffering is, right? You're throughout your lifetime, you are first of all, you're gonna die. So that's a deep, very scary reality to face. Along the way, you're going to see family members pass away. You're going to see pets die, pass away. You're going to suffer illness. You're going to see, I mean, look, we're in the middle of a pandemic. You're gonna suffer breakups. All these different things of suffering is just going to hit you right in the face. And then we have to come and figure out, well, how do I handle these things, right? And so when you take these things, when you take what I just said and you really think about it, it's like, well, what's the point of life? Like, that's so evil, and like, why are we here, right? But I believe that you have two options. I believe that you can either live this life in suffering, or you can live this life in suffering but doing it willingly. I believe that is the only two options that we have, to do it willingly. And I believe that Jesus Christ did this in the best example ever possible. So essentially, right? And so we're obviously, for those of you that don't know, Jesus Christ, we're talking about the Bible here, right? The story of the Bible. So Jesus Christ, essentially, what did he do, Josh?
Yeah, he was sent from heaven. I think in simple terms, like in all of human history, it's been turmoil, and like God's good creation created um, a world that was good, that functions and is purposeful and full of life. But for us as humans, that we chose to act outside of that. We chose to do it our way instead of His way. And what that did is that just fractured humanity, and it separated us from who God is. And so God's plan A the entire time was to rescue His humanity. And ultimately, you mentioned the Bible, that the entire scriptures are meant to lead us to who Jesus is.
Yeah.
And so when Jesus comes, He lives the perfect life that we could never live on His behalf, that we could be brought back together with who God is.
But
yeah, in short, that's what He did.
yeah, but like physically, essentially, what did Jesus do? He came to this earth and he suffered alongside with us, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, in the flesh, he took on the burden of mankind, and that is suffering. He ultimately, what he did was he came to earth, he died, and then he resurrected. Right, that is the story, and that's what we believe. But he died in the most crucial way, and he resurrected for the most prosperous virtue, is what I believe. And I believe that he had to do this in such way, or this had to happen in such way, in order to represent what life really is for us, life and death, or should I say death and resurrection. I believe that we live in this vicious cycle every single day, in a small scale and also in a big scale, right? So if we look at the story of Jesus Christ, not only did, okay, think about the way he died, right? He was crucified, which is a horrible way to go, right? But not only that, he was an innocent man. So it's like, imagine being innocent and then suffering, being crucified by your own people, right? By the people that you helped, you saved. So not only is he dying in a crucifix way, but he's also being betrayed. Like, can you picture your own family? Picture your family killing you. Like, that's like the ultimate betrayal. So he's suffering ultimate betrayal, an innocent man, and he's being crucified. So what's going to take him first? The exposure to sun, the bleeding out, the pain? What is it, right? So what I'm trying to express to people is that he suffers the ultimate death. Like, I can't think of a worse way to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then the story says 3 days later, he resurrects, right? But he only resurrects for one reason: to save us, to save the people, the same people that put him on this crucifix, right? So, but he could only do that. He was only able to resurrect and save us all by the suffering that was endured. And the Christians, they see this in a different way too, is you reap what you sow, right? And so if you look at it in the perspective of this story, he could only reap this prosperous virtue by sowing the harshest suffering ever possible, and that is the crucifix and the resurrection. And so, like I'm saying, the only reason I'm presenting this extreme presentation that the Bible expresses is that we can see this cycle going on in our life every single day in small scales. So you let's say you wanted to acquire wisdom, right? So you want to acquire wisdom. What does that take? Well, that takes a lot of time and effort because you need to read, you need to take a book, you need to do a lot of research. You need to do a lot of things that's going to expand your knowledge in order to acquire wisdom. Well, let's think about that. What needs to happen in order for you to sacrifice, which is another example of suffering? You would need to sacrifice time, energy. Maybe your social life is going to diminish, right? Maybe your family around you is not going to see you as much because now you're focusing a little bit more on your knowledge and your wisdom. So what we're seeing is that a lot of things have to die off in order for a prosperous virtue, right? And so if your goal is to attain wisdom, you would need to really cut off and kill these other things in order to acquire the prosperous virtue. And we can see it in fitness too, right? Oh, I want to get healthier. I want to lose weight. I want to do this. I want to do that. Well, guess what? That takes a lot of time and effort too, right? It takes a lot of time and effort, and you can't be going out to eat all the time with your family. You can't be going to that birthday party. You can't be doing this. You can't be doing that because you have a goal. Right? So all these things have to die off in order for you to acquire. I'm telling you, these vicious cycles, we can see it. This death and resurrection, we can see it throughout our whole life if you really dialed in and thought about it, right? And so what I talked about in the beginning is we can choose to do it willingly or we can choose to do it blindly. It's going to happen anyways. We're going to suffer regardless. And so we'll go back to health, right? And so I can take on this burden, right? This moral responsibility of, well, I want to be a healthier person, right? So I'm going to start eating better. I'm going to start focusing on my nutrition. I'm going to start working out. I'm going to start drinking water, doing all these things. So a lot of this undisciplined practices have to die off in order for me to become healthy. Or I can choose to ignore all that, right? And I can live my best life now. But guess what? Later on in my later life, I'm gonna suffer the inevitable, which is, well, I'm probably gonna have a lot of core problems. I'm probably gonna have a lot of health problems. I'm probably gonna have a lot of joint problems. I'm probably gonna die a lot earlier, right? So, in my eyes, if I'm going to endure suffering, I'd rather endure it on my terms. Because
Yeah,
because when it's not on my terms, I mean, that's just brutal.
for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I think to that, and I think what you said is fair. I think there's another reality and a layer to that where we love to have control. Like everything has to be, a certain way. At least I don't know if anyone else struggles with it, but things have to go my way. If not, I get like pretty upset.
Yeah.
And I think that's a common thing. That's something that can at the same time it unites all of us, so we can all relate to that. But there's so many things that are also like not in your control. That there are things where on the fitness side, absolutely, you can spend your whole life, for those that are like even like gym rats that are just like in the gym 24/7. But at the same time, you can also say like you're kind of a slave to the gym. Like the gym is your master, and there's a sense of comfort in that. And I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying that like that's something that you try to have control of. But also, sickness can strike you at any moment, dude. And who would have ever thought that we would live through a pandemic? Which for those that have died from it, over time the variants are a different thing. But I mean, people have died from it, and we never saw that coming. We never, well, at least the common people did.
Yeah.
Other people did.
I talk about it all the time with my best friend. Is like, I never thought I would live through a pandemic or even a world war, which we're might be in the brink of. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah, yeah, bro, for real. Talking about the meaning of life and like Ukraine and Russia are going at it. Like
Yeah.
it's crazy. But yeah, no, I mean, literally, like just anything. So at the same time, yes, like we want to have, like suffering and things like that. It's much easier if we have to endure it. At least let it be on our own terms. The hard part is that what if you're not in control? What if those things are not you can predict or have a tactical manner toward? And I think that's when and I think there's a whole like other thing we can get into about. I think that's when true character comes out. I think that's when you see the true side of people. And I think if you do enough digging for most people, you'll realize that people try to find things that will bring them happiness. So what happens when those things are taken away? And I mean, there's a whole other thing of like, do people crumble under pressure? And so, yeah, I don't know. It's complicated. I think what you said earlier of like, yeah, like this life is hard. We're close to having our first baby. Me and my wife are close to having our first baby coming to this world. And I was thinking the other day, I was like, man, like, isn't like it crazy that like the cruelest thing we could do to that baby is for her to be delivered. Like she's in like this nice little awesome, literally hasn't made. She's fed, through an umbilical. She is like comfy. And the worst thing that happens is once the baby's born, that she is. It's. I mean, it's cold. I mean, obviously, like babies like cry instantly. They have that skin. But also at the same time, it is this beautiful moment of what humans have done in existence. That besides like procreate and stuff like that, we come together. That there's a beautiful moment of life, and it's so complex. How is that baby alive right now?
Yeah.
Like 9 months of development. So it's just crazy. So it's an understatement when we talk about like what is life. It's a very broad question, and I don't know. Because I also wanted to say like, dude, we're both just like some 25-year-olds going through all of world history, and we're just new contributors in it. And I wanted to say this: I would have a really hard time for anyone that's like younger or whether it's our age, younger, or even a little older, and just say, bro, here's the meaning of life. And they have just this clear, concise answer. I was like, I'd really struggle with that. I'd really, unless it comes from a place of humility where they're like, listen, I've been through like the most messed up situations, and through it all, I've come to this answer. For me, at least for me, I might not be speaking for everybody. For me, I'm like, you might have something to say about maybe something that we haven't tapped into or talked about, but anyone that's just like, oh, listen, bro, I got the answer. I did some Indiana Jones and I got the little Temple of Doom thing, and I have the answer. It's right here. I'm just kind of like, yeah, I don't think you do. So
Yeah, no.
and life will humble you really quickly. So
For sure. And I think in an instance like that, I mean, obviously, nobody's life is perfect. So everybody handles like trials and tribulations in different ways. And, people have millions of problems. But I guarantee you that somewhere in this world, somebody has it worse than you. Right. And also, further on that point, is that I'm pretty sure if you can really dig deep down and if you're honest with yourself, you can also dig deep into your past and pick out things that you could have done in order to have a better outcome in your life as well. Like there's probably some things that you did too. You ignore those things and in order to make yourself a victim of the product. Like there's this book that I read, and in a part of it there's a troubled woman, and she went to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist asked her what was wrong, and the patient didn't really know how to answer it, but her response was, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I really hope it's my fault. And so the psychiatrist was like, why would you say that? It's like, if it's my fault, then I can attain some control over it. But if it's God's fault, well then that's just the inevitable reality and I can't change that, right? And so what I took from that was like, All right, let me dig into a problem of mine and really try to be true with myself and say, what did I do wrong? Right? What are the things that I'm not being honest with myself that I could have fixed and I can fix now? And what are the stuff that I can't fix and that I'm just like, okay, well, how can I make this not so bad? I
For
don't
sure. Yeah.
know.
Yeah. That's wild, man. Life is
Yeah.
complicated. Um, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, the meaning of life, Roger. What would you say is the meaning of life? Let's maybe start there. Maybe we can talk about maybe like the common, where do people lie in the sense of the meaning of life?
Well, first of all, I think what I said in the beginning was I think that people just choose to ignore it. I think that's number one.
Okay.
I think that is such a difficult question to ask, not just other people, but yourself. So people just tend to just try to ignore it as much as they can, which is not. I wouldn't say that's a necessarily horrible thing to do, but it's not the noble thing to do, and I don't think that it's the right thing to do at the same time either, because I believe that although it's a difficult question, I believe that everybody has a purpose, right? Everybody has a calling, and that you must be awake enough in order for that calling. But you see, the world is so complex. Life is so complex. And so what we tend to do is we tend to narrow it out. And this is a good thing, right? Because if we didn't narrow things down, well then we'd be overwhelmed with everything. And so our vision is like this, right? So if I wanted to focus on the conversation at hand, well, I'm listening to you and I'm looking at you, right? But let's say I really wanted to grasp everything else that was going on around me. Well, how was that light bulb on over there in the corner of that lamp over there? How was that clock ticking in the correct time all the time? How are those walls painted? How are this painted? Well, that's just too complex. I'm not going to be able to focus on what truly matters, and that's this conversation at hand, right? So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing that people kind of try to like narrow in, but at the same time, it can be harmful. I mean, anything, I believe there's a balance, right? I believe there's balance to everything in the world. So I think we do need to be careful. So when I say this, I don't mean to just, put your nose down and focus on one thing either. But I think that we do need to focus on our calling and what's important in life and really try to focus on, okay, well, what control do I have over this? And what importance does it have on my life? And what can I do for others also? At the end, I guess to answer your question in the most um, simplest words is I believe that life is about making things the least suffering as possible. As harsh as people don't want to hear that, because I know that might sound very pessimistic to people. It's like, so that's the meaning of life to you? Like, just make it less suffering? Like, you don't want to make it good? It's like, well, suffering is always going to be there, and it's going to be, if I can leave this world better than what it was before me, that's my goal.
Yeah.
If I can leave it in a better place than what it was than before I was born, that is the goal that I have.
Hmm. There's some YouTuber that I watch, or no, sorry, I don't watch him. He's like featured on some of the YouTube guy, but one of the things that he says his catchphrase is "decrease world suck" is what he kind of goes by.
That's perfect. He
And
probably put it better than I did.
I'm literally saying that. I'm saying that for you. I can't even plug the guy because I don't even know who he is. But one of the things he said, I was like, oh, that's a very concise way to say, yeah, just bro, you just got to decrease world suck, because it's hard. Yeah, life is hard. Um, yeah, and I think at the same time, I think we can also overcomplicate it too. I think we try to, take all these other things. Maybe some of it's experience, and maybe some of it's just like maybe something at the moment we're passionate about, and then maybe people will go down. We'll go that route. Let's say someone's just passionate about something, they go down that route for a little bit, and then they lose that drive, that passion, and then they kind of drop off, and then they start over on something new. I'm not saying fresh starts are bad, and I'm not saying like if you have to assess your life and things like that. But also, I think there's naturally things that you get excited about. I think there's things that are wired in you that you can have some sort of passion. And I'm not saying that's easy. I don't want anyone listening. I don't want to belittle you if you're going through that process of trying to, okay, what's my purpose? What am I supposed to do? I don't want to minimize that struggle, because I also believe like that's a journey. I think that's a journey that God takes us on. But I think there are passions that we have that when we focus in on them, and some of that is trial, it's trial and error, some of it's just kind of figuring it out. Um, but I think when we find our purpose, when we find things that, hey, like actually, there's people in my life that I trust that are, whether they might be mentor figures or people that can hold you accountable. Let's say, hey, like they said I'm pretty good at something, and if you're like in that journey, like maybe listen to the people around you and what they say, like, hey, you know what, you're really good at this, Roger. You're a great question asker. You're a great, you're a great podcast host. And then when you go down those journey, when you go down those paths, you can find like, hey, like maybe this is something that is part of it. Um, so we keep talking about calling, and we keep talking about all those things. I believe for sure, like there can be a clear calling, and I think it's okay for even if that calling changes over time. But I think that the calling is less like I just had this like clear moment with God, and He like through the clouds, and I just knew this is what I had to do. And I'm not saying that can't happen. I'm just saying that the likelihood of that also happening doesn't have to be your number one target.
Yeah.
I think you can also look at like the journey that you've been on, and you can look back and say like, man, God was totally with me the whole time during that work. There were people in my life strategically that poured into me that it's clear that this is what I need to keep doing. So, and for anyone that's listening, I don't want to. So like for me, as a youth pastor, how did I end up here? And Roger and I went to school together in high school, and people they would know that it's natural I went kind of down this path, but it wasn't like super easy. I started off, I felt like to ministry, which really just ministry is just to be a lead servant, and so through that I was kind of feeling that calling just because I was in youth group. In our high school we had an SCA, and I got really. There were people in my life that just kind of said, hey, Josh, that this might be something you might want to look into. Now, at the time, I did not feel equipped. I did not feel like I was good enough, smart enough. I had all my insecurity and still have my insecurity. But from there, I was just like, okay, you know what? I do know, I do want to go to school somewhere. I want to leave my option. I go to the university I went to, Howard Payne University in Brownwood, Texas. And from there, literally, like, I kid you not, my first year there, by the end of it, I had a professor that had been, that I'd been talking to a lot. I said, hey, there's a church, out in the town, 45 minutes out here. They'd love to, or you should put your resume in and be interviewed by them. And I was like, really? I don't think I'm ready for that, or I should be that. And he was like, no, that's okay. So I did, and I was just like, okay, God, this is where I need to be, like, let you, take the wheel of this one. So I go through the whole process, and basically, by the end of it, long story short, I get to the point where, like, hey, the church believes that you're the person that is going to, minister to our students. Now, for anyone listening, like, we're not just playing games. Like, I take what I do, like, teenage years, like the most foundational parts of your life. Think of all the struggles of high school. Bro, even, like, breakouts and pimples and being insecure about that, or even, like, just, home issues, family issues, like, social issues. There's so many things. I'm like, these people feeling that for me. And so I was like, okay. Like I said, I would go and be a part of it. All this to say, after that, I look back on it, and I was at that church for 5 years before I felt a little, in Olson. But what I'm trying to say is that part of the calling that I feel absolutely all the ministry was looking back at my journey, looking at the things where strategic people were placed with my pastor that I was the church I was at, his name Zach, and then my current pastor David, and they're both phenomenal people. But when I look back, foundational people that shared that this is my calling in life. I say that one, so I mean, I can share kind of my story, but also for people that might be wrestling with, like, you don't have to overcomplicate it. Like, it's the spelling in the sky or this thing that's just going to fall in your lap. I'd say the first thing is like start off with things that you're excited about, that you're proud of, that gets you excited to, that you don't want to hit snooze on your alarm, but you just want to wake up and rest and go do it. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
my journey, and that's encouragement for anyone else.
Yeah, for sure. A couple of things on that. So, first and foremost, what you said about the youth pastor and the importance of it, I find I can speak for me personally. And you and I, we went to church together in high school, throughout high school. That youth group, in that short period of time, I probably went for about 2 years, right? That played a huge role in my character and my core belief system. Now I can say, Rod, if you're listening to this, bro, I'm telling you right now, you may not believe it, but a lot of my core beliefs came out of that youth group. The little lessons that we had. I'm telling you, it did. It made a huge impact in my life. So youth pastors have a very important job. So I want to let that be known, not just to the viewers, but to any youth pastors that are listening right now. You are very much appreciated. This is coming from someone who I look up to pastors with the highest respect because it's so difficult. It's such a difficult thing to do, to preach a word that is going to impact immature kids that probably do not appreciate it at the moment, but it's gonna pay due dividends later on in the road. And then secondly, towards the end, you were talking about how your journey, right, and how it you look back at it and you realize that there were some things that you had to go through, and along the way, God was with you. I recently tweeted out a tweet, and this is something like one of those shower thoughts, right? I don't know what I was doing. I wasn't in the shower, but I was just doing something random, and I think I was reading and listening to a song, and then this quote. I randomly think of quotes came into my head, and I said, "The journey is so that you're not putting pennies in the quarter slots of your game. The game being your purpose." Something along those lines. And so the journey is so important because not only do you learn what it takes to get to the top, so to speak, but you learn the value of it, right? And so when you get there, you know how much it cost, time, energy, and focus in order to attain it, right? So these people that get lucky, like these, I call them lottery winners, they win big, but they don't know how to attain it, right? Right.
That's a great point.
Yeah, so the journey is so you're not putting these cheap valued pennies into where you know where you're at requires quarters. It's expensive. It's expensive to get there and it's expensive to attain. So not only are you well equipped, but you're ready to because it's hard enough to get something you really want, but it's even harder to attain it, is what I believe. But yeah,
Sure. Yeah.
those are some things that I noticed of what you just
Hmm.
said.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And part of it, I mean, some of that takes like great risk, and it's some of the most valuable things in life require some sort of risk. It takes that leap of faith, and that's not even something for those that are on the religious side, or even as a Christian or as a believer. But even for most people, like, I mean, just the general, the things that really matter to you, some of it takes risk. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, there's a whole bunch of examples.
for sure. Also, third thing about what you said in your story was that you started to listen onto what people, essentially society, right? You said friends, you said your professor. They started to tell you, hey, listen, like I think you're good here. I think you're good there. That's also part of our calling is should be beneficial to others. It shouldn't just be we're not meant to hoard things, right? God doesn't want us to hoard anything. He wants us to spread our gift in order to show his grace. And so in order to do so, well, I mean, it would make some sense that you would want to listen to what the people around you are telling you what you're good at, right? That's a little dangerous in itself too, but it's good because I believe in the great Orson Welles in the 1900s, right? This is someone who I look up to a lot. He says that you owe your position to the very people that you gained it from. And so he was a public man, and so I owe my job as a public speaker back to the public. And what he means by that is that he wouldn't be where he's at without those people. And so now his life goal is to give back to them. And the way he gives back to them is that he speaks for them, for the people. Right. And I believe that we should do that with our gifts. And so if people are telling you, guys, if people are telling you, and it's a lot of people, and it's people that are important, and people that you know that you can rely on, and they seem well equipped mentally, maybe listen to them. Maybe take a chance, and maybe that's your calling. If you're called to be a teacher, hey, great. You know what I mean? And people are telling you, hey, you'd be a great teacher, and you just blow that off. That might have been your calling. Or, you know, maybe you're a great speaker, or maybe you're a great engineer. Maybe you'd be a great doctor. Whatever it is, life's a risk, and I believe that we do need to. I think trial and error is a part of living, and I think that people are, maybe even the more traditional where we're from, are a little bit too scared to go and experiment, because maybe their families and friends will look upon them very difficult. I mean, me in this podcast, you know, there's not many people where I'm from, right in the valley, doing a podcast. That's kind of like, what? Like, why are you putting yourself out there like that? And two,
Yeah.
if it's not making you money, why are you doing it, right? It was like, oh, well, maybe it could possibly make me money in the future. You never know. It's like, what? Like, go get your CDL and go go to the oil rigs, right?
Be productive, bro. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No. It was like, I mean, obviously for you, and I know you put in the work for a lot of this stuff. There's so many hours that go behind the scenes,
Oh, for sure.
you know, to get this, to get this. I mean, even just me knowing your character, you know, in our times growing up.
I'm gonna need you. I'm gonna need you to repeat that again. The part, all I heard was your character.
Yeah. So your character, that when you know, when I heard that you were getting a podcast together, I literally thought, I was like, that seems so like the natural thing for Roger. Like I was like, that's like, it wasn't a surprise to me basically that you were going on this adventure. And I was like, I knew, like, as far as the work ethic, the drive and desire, like it's, yeah, I knew that was happening. And then also, you know, before we got on here, you're talking about 1,000. Your first video with 1,000 views. Like that's a huge milestone, bro.
Yeah,
like
for sure. That's
really,
all.
I mean, we can.
That's all you
Yeah.
guys. Thank you all.
So yeah, thank you, listeners. So a shameless, you know, thanks to you guys. You guys keep them going. So, and keep listening. Share with your friends, everyone. But yeah, I mean, it was very natural for when I heard that, because I know who you are. It wasn't a surprise when you said you were going to do the podcast. So, and also to that, like for people that speak in your life, because like I think you made the distinction of like society, but I also want to make. I think it's also important for people to hear this too, of like, you know, some people are like, be selective of who you have, and yes, you should be. But I think it's a little more in depth than that. I think there's people who that you can respect, that you admire, but people that are also humble enough to let you into their world, and share, whether they share their mistakes. I think one of the things that, you know, so Roger brought up Rod. He was our youth pastor growing up, and I think one of the things that was super awesome him is that he was not afraid to share his mistakes. And as teenagers, that was very like, oh, like, so I don't have to pretend like I got this all together.
Yes.
Like Christianity is not about me, like, you know, pretending like I'm this, you know, public figure or whatever. I was like, no, like it's broken people coming to be restored by Jesus. And so, you know, I think for him, that's one of the things for him. So for me, it even kind of goes back to the meaning of life. I would struggle with anyone that says, here's the meaning of life, and doesn't come out at it with some humility. And so the people that I had that were in my life, that I can look back at those people and I can see that there's a sense of humility from them. And then also I think it's, I heard this, you know, a pastor that I listened to, one of the things that he says is, you know, how do you keep your, like, you know, your head from getting too big of like, oh, look at what I'm doing, whatever. Like, surround yourself with people that don't care. You know, surround yourself with people that, okay, big whoop, so what? you know, and really,
That's tough
yeah,
to do because I mean it's like like what? This guy's not fascinated?
yeah, but like, I mean, it's true, and like, no matter what you do, it's like, okay, like, you know, big whoop. Going back to the grand scheme of things, yes, life is valuable, life is important, it's complicated, but also like you will die. You know, one of the things we talked about was everyone will die. We talked about that. But everyone will die, and so like big whoop. And what do you brought up like what do you contribute to the world, or what is it that you're decreasing world soccer or whatever. Um, but yeah, and I think ultimately, at least for me, ultimately it's that can only be fulfilled with my heart being restored by Jesus, Him transforming, Him taking my broken pieces of my life and bringing me back together with how God created me to be. Ultimately, I think that's the direction that I go down, and I believe that that's not just me, but a whole history of people came. Um, Another thing, so you were talking about who was the author, the one that you were talking about, um, the public speaker,
Ooh, what do you mean?
the one that you just talked about that he gives thanks as a public speaker, he gives his thanks to the public.
Oh, Orson Welles. Yeah.
Okay, so Orson Welles, so a lot like almost what he said. So on we talked about before of Neil deGrasse Tyson,
Mm,
the astrophysicist guy.
yeah.
One of the things he talks about is I love listening to the guy because he like talks to you like he's not talking at you, he's like talking with you, but you have no chance to respond to him. And so
Yeah.
it's 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 really a fascinating thing. But one of the things he talks about is how for him, he believes for his duty and his line of work of what he does is he gets to pick all the stuff of the people that have gone before him, all the knowledge, all the mistakes and trials. He gets to take that, and then he gets to form into who he is and what he's done. Really, all I'm advocating for is I'm saying the exact same thing. Is that I'm taking those that have come to follow Jesus, who have paved the way, and I'm taking along those things and laying that inform my life and the ministry and what God has called me to do. So it's really fascinating how there's some almost like there's connections to all of that. Um, yeah. Anyway, I think that's really cool.
I think that's I think everybody should do that though. I think that's a part of humility is going back into history. I mean, there's two centuries. I mean, 2 centuries, 2,000 years already, right, of life that have lived before us. And for me to think that I know more than the 2,000 years of history
Mm.
before me, not to study, like that's kind of like that your head's a little bit too big if you think that, right? So I think it's in whatever field you want to get into. It can be in the health, it can be into war, it can be whatever you want to specialize, whatever your expertise is, your direction. To go back into history and to learn from that, and if you don't do that, that's a big disservice, I think. And you need to be humbled. But I want to attack this question if that's okay with you, unless you want to add something.
Yeah. No. Let's go for it.
Okay. So this question was asked on Instagram. By the way, guys, I didn't say this in the intro, which sucks because I keep forgetting to say it. But if you haven't already, go follow the Instagram, which is going to be The Real Common Podcast on Instagram. Go check us out. I'm allowing you all to engage with us on Instagram. So every podcast, what I'm going to be doing is releasing the topic, and I'm going to ask you all to ask a question. That way we can ask it live on the podcast. So we got one question, but one question is better than no questions. And that is, when life has put trial after trial to achieve a goal, does that mean to give up or to try more? That's a very good question, and we kind of talked about it a little bit, right? In regards of calling, but you want to try to tackle this question first, or
Yeah. So the ending of it. What is it again?
so when I puts trials after trials to achieve your goal, does that mean to give up or try more?
Yeah. I mean I think so. If it's talking about goals, and things like that. Um, I was actually talking to my wife about this of like, so it depends. It's a very broad like question, but I think
Yeah.
also like, so here's another side of what I think. Depending on the goals that you have set. So obviously, have goals that scare you a little bit. Have goals that are like, okay, this is going to be a challenge. There's going to be some work, but also, I think sometimes like even when people set goals, I think sometimes you can, without knowing, you kind of set yourself up for failure.
Yeah.
If you set a goal that's like, yeah, there's absolutely no way that you could attain that. But if you have small little milestones that you go, or something that's workable, then yeah. So my first thought when I heard that, I thought, okay, well, is your goal attainable? Like, is there some possibility where you can do that? And what are the factors that factor in? Is it effort? Is it um, patience? Is it time, longevity, whatever? And you have to look at those and take a serious look at, okay, how am I going to get there? If I'm really passionate about those things, how am I going to get there? And so I would say to answer that, depending on the goal, yeah, you might have to give up, depending on the goal. I think we don't talk about it enough as people. Of just like, yeah, like it's okay. Like that doesn't ruin your life. If anything, you might be trying to ruin your life, trying to make something, trying to make it fit when it doesn't fit. But if it's something that's like, hey, this is attainable, and these factors, they don't hurt anybody. They don't. They're not something that compromises me, who I am. And so, like, get after it. Like, yeah, don't give up. Keep going. But if things have like hindered you and have set you back, and I don't want this to sound cruel or like anyone that might be going through that, or even whoever wrote that question, to sound like I'm careless, but that's life. There are going to be the things that get in your way, and if it's something where it's just like, okay, I counted the cost. That's something I kind of I counted the cost, and I shouldn't go forward with this.
Yeah.
Or you're like, I counted the cost. And I'm like, you know what? I believe I need to keep on going. There's absolute, like, obviously for me and my family, if it involves like compromising anything of that, yeah, that's out the door. Like I'm not going to mess with that. But if it's something that's like, okay, if I can still maintain who I am, have my integrity, and still provide for my family, take care of them, serve God in doing that, then yeah, like it's time to get to work. It's time to. So really, my answer to that is it just depends on who's asking and what that goal is.
That's a very good response. If you have to turn to a part-time stripper in order to attain it, it's probably not the move. It's probably better to quit. No, but yeah, very very well put. I believe it also does depend. It depends. It could ultimately, even as bad as it may hurt you, you may have to quit, but you could also keep going more. And like you said, it all depends. I think it comes down to truly asking yourself, one, how much work have I put? Have I really put honest work? Or have I just been saying that I've been working, but not really been giving what I could possibly give? And two, really assess the goal and be like, am I truly cut out for this? Like, if this job is like to become an NBA star and I'm only 5'5", it's like, you know what I mean? You have to be rational. There's people that say like just chase your goals no matter what. Like that'll only get you so far, right? Like you can't. Like Josh, I think Josh put it perfectly. If it's going to put a lot of things in harm, such as family, financial stuff in danger, then you should probably just walk away from it. But if it's something that's very attainable, and if you're truly honest with yourself, you're like, you know what, I haven't been putting that much work in. It's something that I really, if I want this, I'm gonna really have to work hard for it. Then if it's attainable, then go for it. I believe that.
Yeah. And I don't know, for whoever asked that, I don't know, because if it's like a fitness one, obviously there's a level where like you can control some of that. I've heard even in the podcast before, like you've talked about, like, yeah, even in genetics, like if people want to blame that, my genetics, like it's very easy for me to grow. And I think for you said that for yourself. So I thought that was a funny way to put it. But yeah, also there's like a level where like you contribute to that, and like there are things that you can be conscious of.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's like yeah, like stuff that like if you've got big dreams, there's nothing wrong with dreaming big. I would say there's a point where it's almost not even a goal anymore. It's more of, and it's okay to have vision. It's okay to have those things that are far off, but you can't let that become the thing that you like right in front of your face. Right now, you have to deal with today has enough problems of its own. And you need to assess that. Then you need to focus on tomorrow when tomorrow comes.
For
Now,
sure.
if you have a vision in mind, there are things that you can take along the process. You just have to also know to yourself like overnight journey, um, and yeah. So
Yeah, there's
yeah,
something else that I tweeted also that said you should aim heavenward, or for I'm gonna put it in more simpler terms. I tweeted out in two different ways. You can aim for the moon. Okay, no, I'll leave it the way it was. You can aim heavenward, but attend to today. And what that means is like, okay, you can set your goal for the future, but you have to take care of what you need to take care of today, and then worry about the next day. Because if you get too focused on the future, you're gonna forget about your task at hand today. And so that's a big thing as well. Jordan Peterson, and going back to this question, Jordan Peterson talks about this, and he gives an example of a game, and he says there's a game for everybody. You just have to find your game, and that is your dream, that is your goal, that is your calling. But you have to truly assess yourself and say, okay, this is my game, this is what I'm good at, and use the tools that God and the gifts that God has given you in order to be the best at that. But if it's not your game, and if it's costing you too much to try to go for it, then maybe that's not your game. And that's a hard thing to do, is give up on something you really want to do. But sometimes that's what you got to do. We're not telling you to quit. We're not.
don't hear that. Yeah, no, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not suggesting for anyone that you should quit. I'm just saying that you should take a serious look at what you've got going on, and listen. Like your life is too valuable to do something that, and even if you absolutely love it, if it's harming you ultimately, I think you need to take a serious look and see. Okay, um, what do I need to like kind of bring get off the pedal a little bit, and how can I use and even for Jordan Peterson, how he put that, how do I use like the gifts that God has given me? If I truly believe, if God created heaven and earth, like then what I'm living on is borrowed air, borrowed living, borrowed time, and for me to live out this purpose, um, then how do I responsibly steward the things that I'm given to accomplish things? And maybe we can talk about it. Decrease world suck. We can, how do I make this world better, or how do I just live as the person that God created me to be? Yeah, you need to take a serious look at that, and also give yourself permission. Like it's okay if it's something that's like, yeah, this is hurting me. I need to stop. I would say if it's hurting you, I will say for anyone that's listening, like if it's hurting you, like get out of there. Like if it's affecting things that are actually important, like your immediate family. As far as like for me and my wife and for baby, if anything compromises that, like I'm sorry, but I don't care whose feelings are hurt. I'm out. I made a covenant commitment to her, not you. And so that's my top priority. And obviously, for God who's provided everything for me, that if it compromises that, I'm also like, yeah, I'm out. And I don't feel bad about it. So yeah, that's all I have. So.
Yeah. So thank you so much for the question. As you can tell, I mean, we did go on quite a bit of a tangent about it. So the people that are listening right now, if you ever have a question about any topics that we have, this is literally what's going to be the result. Is that we're going to expand on it, and you get the opportunity to actually engage with the podcast. This is our podcast. Right? I don't like to just say it's my podcast. It's the viewers. Y'all are involved as well. But yeah. I want you, before we even think about ending this podcast, we were having dinner a couple weeks ago, and you had brought up this like analogy, I guess you can say, or like this descriptive image that I can't get rid of, and you sent it to me through text as well. Explain that a little bit, and how'd you come
Yeah.
across that?
I forgot what we were talking about, but we were talking about how I think we were talking about how like people in conflict that they both believe that they're right.
Oh yes, I was talking
And
about wars, and I was talking
yeah,
about how yeah. So I was telling Josh about how I believe that people overall try to do the right thing, that they try to do good,
mm,
right? And so I was asked by a colleague of mine and said, "Well, why does God allow all these terrible things to happen, right?" And so he brought up war as one of the examples, and I said, "Well, if we really take a step back and look at wars, who's fighting against who? God's not fighting against us. We're actually fighting against each other, right?" But I'm gonna take it a step further and say, well, I would even argue that the people on the right think that they're doing the moral correct thing to do, and I would also say that the people on the left think that they're doing the moral correct thing to do. And if that wasn't the case, they wouldn't be so passionate about what they're fighting about, right? So
mm,
both sides think that they're right. They're passionate about it, right? But I said, if we both came to God, if we both came together and followed the word of God, we wouldn't be fighting. So ultimately, whose fault is it? Is it really God's fault, or is it man? Is it flesh? And then you brought up this spaceship thing, and I was like,
yeah. There's something before remind me is about that. Is it God or what is it? I think that's important. I don't think we should be afraid to ask that question either.
yeah,
I think even Christians should be more open to asking some difficult questions. Or we push them aside. Yes, no. So what I talk about, like how barbaric is it that like there's one planet, okay, this literal flying space rock flying through the universe. Um, like there's no other place to go, and we choose to do terrible things to each other. Like we choose to harm each other. We choose to hoard and withhold things from each other. And it's like, bro, there's no like other option. Like there's that. This is what we've got. Like, man, I'm gonna roll up my sleeves for this. Because it's crazy. And when you put it that simply, it's just like, listen, like almost forget everything else. Just like we're all just trying to make it. Like we're all just doing our best of what we're given
yes,
to figure out how we're. And yet we choose whoever is more powerful chooses to unleash their rule and power, whatever they believe is right and wrong. And then history has shown that those that have been the receivers of that those people eventually become the power and they become the exact same thing that they were a part of. And so it's this, maybe even going back to what you said earlier, this vicious cycle of life. When you think about it, it's really like primitive for us to look at this world and just like, yeah, there's, unless you're like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, you're trying to get to Mars, all of them.
yeah.
Um,
Well, Well, like what I took from that, like the moral of the story is that we are encoded and we're primitively evil, right? That goes back to the suffering. Is that, well, who imposes the suffering? I think that we ultimately do the suffering too, right? It's not just the inevitable things that is dying, right? That's something that we can control. But I think that we inflict a lot of the suffering upon ourselves as well. I believe that also with the good that we can do, we also know the bad that we can do. And because we
mhm.
know the bad that we can do, because that we know we can hurt so bad, we impose that hurt onto other people. It's like, man, I would really hate for somebody to vent out that deep dark secret of myself. So Josh tells me a deep dark secret of him. I know how much that would hurt me if that was released. I'm gonna release his deep dark secret. How conniving is that, right? But we know how that pain will feel, right? And because I don't like Josh, I'm gonna deal that pain on him, even though I wouldn't want that done to me. Like, how evil is that? That's the amount of evil that we're capable of.
For sure. And I think there are things in our life that enhance genuine joy and happiness and things like that. I think uh, marriage, for place whatever. That was just an example, but just place whatever can make you feel genuine joy. I think we can have like little highlights for it, but the overall picture, we're very selfish people. All of us are. Like no one can run from that. There's a point where we all, um, bro, for crying out loud, in a pandemic that is viral uh, through like
Airborne.
airborne respiratory. Uh, and what's the first thing from the grocery stores that like goes out? It's toilet paper. Like everybody's talking
Yeah.
about that. So like it's like what does toilet paper have to do with anything? Like we're just selfish people that hoard the most weirdest things, and we think like, oh yeah, absolutely. And that's a silly example, but like in practical ways, like we do that all the time. And
Yeah, I mean, think about it. We have enough food. We have enough food to feed everybody on Earth. We do. That's a fact. That's not something I made up. But yet we still have people starving. And so I forgot where I listened to this, but it was like, well, why do people starve? It's not. Well, people don't starve because it's it's like the world. I forgot how they put it. It's like we make people starve. People
Mhm.
don't starve because there isn't enough. Like we do it to them.
Yeah, so we were talking a little bit about this, before, and this was the thing I wanted you to remind me of. Like, is it God? Is it why does God do this or whatever? And again, for anyone that might be wrestling with some hard questions, like I just want to encourage you, like just go to someone that you trust that exemplifies humility that I talked about earlier, and ask those hard questions too. But anyways, this book that I read is called literally like you want to talk about a brave title. It's called "The God I Don't Understand." Authored by a guy Christopher J. H. Wright. And one of the things he like kind of starts off with is like is people who and he's kind of assessing the whole thing of suffering between natural disasters, warfare, all these things. And one of the things he talks about is he's like for people that are wondering like how could God do such a terrible thing like a tsunami that kills hundreds of thousands of people or something like that. And I, I read the book a while back. If I don't remember exactly, go check it out for yourself. I'm putting it direct quote or anything. But the premise that I remember when I look back, that's fair to say. Okay, this natural disaster caused all this things. Also, if we look at think about if we do have enough food to serve everybody, yeah, we should support it and things like that. There's also tons of preventable diseases that people die from every single day, and it's completely preventable. And so, if you want to make God responsible for the natural disaster, we have to be responsible. Like, well, I could be a contributor to keep that from happening. And what do I choose? I don't do anything about it. I continue grabbing my Starbucks coffee. I can, whatever I'm doing. And so, if we're gonna hold God, and this is what he says. I'm not saying we're going to hold God to this standard, then we also have to be willing to say, like, okay, but think of all the stuff that we as people are responsible for. And if we all band together, we could solve it. But guess what? I firmly believe like, that's never going to happen. We are selfish people that ultimately it's ingrained in who we are that we choose to live and do things our way instead of like, ultimately we just share a common interest of listen, I'm just looking out for me. And I say I could do all these nice things. I say I care about people, but also my track record is I'm really just looking out for me. And
Yeah.
yeah, so but it is crazy though, and like that was like right before. I was like, it's funny. Roger and I were literally talking about like these that they just believe they're doing the right thing, and yeah, it's just a terrible thing going on.
Yeah, I totally agree with you when you say that. Well, if we're gonna hold God accountable for something, well, let's also reflect on what we're accountable for, right? We're probably accountable for way more deaths than a natural disaster, especially nowadays where we can predict natural disasters. Nowadays where there's a lot of preventable things that we thank God, we're at a level where we can do those things and predict it and evacuate and do all this stuff, right? That predict the weather. But we're gonna forget about all the wars that we've caused. We're gonna forget about all this stuff. I was actually, this is pretty crazy, maybe off topic, but whatever. I was reading a story, and the CIA back in I don't even know, it was in the 1900s. They had conducted this like experiment with a disease where these people were infected, and instead of treating them, they acted like treating them, but they really wanted to see the long term effects on the disease, so they let these people just suffer. And I thought that was pretty crazy. It's like, dang, how evil are we as people that we were able to allow that?
Yeah, for sure. We're capable of a whole lot, and
And so that's
I mean,
that's what I mean by, it's like, okay, we're capable of so much evil. So if I can do my part, right? Because I can't control Josh, I can't control the people listening to this podcast. But if I can do my part in making the world less vicious, then let me contribute with that. And that's not an easy task. That's not, right? Because I have my selfish desires. I have, I'm fleshful. I have flaws. I have faults, and I need a battle within myself. So, yeah,
yeah, and there's just one planet where we're just trying to figure it out. Continue to do what we do, and it'd be naive for us to think that on our own we can do something to. I was like, listen, do you know, like in all of world history, every superpower has fallen at some point in time.
yeah,
There is no superpower that's in the world today that is. I mean, we're maybe like tribes that are like deep in like uh, deep in like places, but as far as like world powers that have like the working system, working government, like they're all fallen. And it's not just because like, oh, we made a couple. Like that's how we are as
yeah,
the people, and yeah, and we're going to continue to do it. So,
yeah. So,
uh,
like, in conclusion, for me, what's the meaning of life? I think that the meaning of life is to own, is to, sorry, is to take on suffering willingly and own your moral responsibility and to do your part. For me, that is the way that I see life. Take on suffering willingly, own your responsibility, your moral responsibility, and do your part. I think that's all that we can do as individuals.
yeah, I really like that actually. That's pretty good.
You like that?
Well, honestly, because like at first I was like, I wonder like what Roger's gonna like take on that, and you mentioned early on of even like that's what he literally took on really like maybe as a son we're called to do. So for that, I really love that.
Okay, hold on. I'm gonna need you to repeat that again because you're cutting off really bad. I can't hear audio.
Well,
Okay, go ahead.
okay,
All right.
no, I really like how you said that because the taking on suffering part, that's absolutely what Jesus did. I love it because it seems it is very countercultural. But no one wants to hear it. It's pretty hard, but also like the reality of the world. I think it's a very good, like, concise way to explain that, but also doesn't give you like an absolute. Like it's very vague at the same time, and I think that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think answering that question in an absolute is very daring. And I think that I don't think it'll end well for anybody that tries to answer this question. Like you said, without any humility at all. Like, look, Josh, this is the meaning of life. And you better do it. If not, damned are you.
Yeah, I'd just be like, bro, like life is gonna humble you really hard. You're gonna have a wake up call,
For sure.
will shake you, and there's nothing you can do about it. So, And I love that. I think I almost want to steal something from you. Yeah, at least what I thought. Yeah, I think everybody. So the meaning of life, I almost have to change that a little bit. I think all of us have a a purpose that God has called us to. We have to have ears and eyes to see and hear. Um, and for us to live out that purpose, for us to do those things, and then ultimately, I mean, everyone does that, or at least is trying to do that. But I think ultimately you can still end up empty trying to do something that you think of all the stuff that you were once passionate about, and then like however much time later, you're like the things that once made you happy don't make you happy.
Yeah.
And so for me, if I'm taking that seriously, I'm saying, okay, go with your purpose and do something that no matter how you're feeling, that there's something greater than. For me, it's that we're called to glorify God with what He has given us. He's created this good world, not for us to hoard or be selfish from people, but for us, not just more than just to just live for Him, but to give back of what He has already given to us, to where it rightfully belongs. And so I think if I can simplify that and kind of make it at least somewhat, it's rocky, but at least to make it somewhat pretty and palatable is to live your purpose, live your calling that God has put on your life, and give Him glory ultimately at the end of it. Dude, but I really love what you said too. I think that's absolutely biblical and way better than anything I could have come up with. So,
Well, to
yeah,
to be fair, I've been thinking about this topic and this discussion for like I want to say 4 months now. Like, I know I shared it with Twitter. I release subliminals on Twitter, so people don't know what I'm fully thinking of. I use Twitter as like my little sketchbook. So like when I tweet out stuff, by the way, you guys, my Twitter is O Rogers with two S's at the end. What I do is I'm sending notes to myself. And so like I'll release bits of information that will allow me to go back and be like, okay, this is what I thought there, this is what I thought there, and I'm like plugging things in, and I have a notebook, and this is where I write all the stuff. So I've been thinking about this topic a lot. So I've been thinking a lot about the Jesus taking on suffering willingly, and the having to endure that suffering in order for that prosperous virtue. That all of that I've been thinking about it for a very long time, and I've been applying it into my own life because for even like the non-believers, I would say, and I know you may not believe this because we both are believers, but like let's say someone doesn't believe in God. Picture God as like your deepest consciousness, like that consciousness that you don't ever get to see or touch, but you get a glimpse of it. It's like that's your calling. That glimpse of like, oh, this makes me happy, or like maybe I'm doing the right thing, right? That's your calling, right? And then your bodily, your flesh. Well, I mean, that could be kind of like a representation of Jesus, right? Because Jesus is God in the flesh, right? And so, well, if I'm Jesus, so to speak, right? Whatever, using this analogy, well, my what I'm supposed to do is take on suffering willingly for prosperous virtues, but not just virtues for me, right? Because Jesus didn't do it for him; he did it for the betterment of everybody and his Father. And so that's what I've been thinking of.
yeah. You know, Roger, I would say maybe because you said you were thinking about it the past 4 months. I would say you've been thinking about that your whole life. Uh, I one time, and I always say that I heard or one time I was in class and when I was in school, and one of the things that I had asked, and it was a genuine question. You know, part of what I do is pretty much weekly I'm preparing some sort of message that can some shape or form present the gospel to students. And I remember asking, like, how long does it take for you to prepare a message? And you're like expecting 8-10 hours, 20 hours or whatever. And he says, yeah, it's taken my whole life to write that one message. Everything I have been through has led to me being the place that I'm at, and then the privilege that I'm at to present whatever I've been given. So I would say, Roger, that you've been thinking your whole life.
Yeah. I like the way you put that. That's great. I recently saw a reel that relates with that so perfectly. There was an artist. He's a famous artist. I forgot the name though. This woman asked him to paint a portrait of her, right? I might be butchering this story, but whatever. Paint a portrait of her, and he did, and it took him 5 minutes. And he said she asked how much for the portrait, and he named this ridiculous amount, like super expensive. And she's like, "You're gonna charge me that much for a portrait you took 5 minutes to draw?" And he says, "You're wrong. It took me a lifetime. You just witnessed 5 minutes of it." And so I was like, "Dang, that's deep."
That's wisdom, bro. That's
Yeah.
wisdom.
Oh, and he said, if it only took 5 minutes, then you would draw an equally good portrait with just a pencil and a paper. And I was like, dang, that's good.
Thank you, whoever that was. Thank you.
Yeah, I forgot where I
for
saw
your
that.
contribution.
Yeah. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add to today's discussion? We've been at it for about an hour and 20 minutes.
Man, and if you listen this far, man, kudos to you.
Yeah.
I hope you have, because man, I've had fun talking about this, and I hope this is not a. I hope this isn't something where we're just like, all right, we've answered it, we figured it all. It's not. I think this is just a continued discussion. It will take our lifetime to go on. Yeah, it was fun being on here, man. Thanks for having me.
For sure. I definitely want to have you back on. I want to have you on the podcast in person, and you know that. I planned to have you on a couple of weeks ago, but things happen and life happens. So, but definitely the next time that you come down here, whenever it is, I do want to have you on the show face to face, because I think that would be a great one too. For the people listening in to the podcast, if you enjoyed this tough question, please in the comments section leave some other topics. Like, I want to have conversations. I want to have difficult conversations with people. Just leave in the comments whatever that y'all think is going to be a tough thing to discuss. I am so driven, and I'm a curious person, like I keep mentioning, to ask questions that are so difficult to answer. That's what I love, right? So make sure that y'all engage with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, make sure to share it with 1 or 2 people, because they could enjoy it just as you just did right now. If you found us on YouTube and it's more convenient, you can find us on Spotify, which is the Common Podcast. If you want a more engaging, interacting visual, then you can find us on YouTube, which is also the Common Podcast. We have an Instagram page, which is the Real Common Podcast. Go check it out. Also, anything that Josh wants me to share, that will be the first in the description. So if he does want it, Instagram, all that stuff, that will be down in the description, so you can go check him out. But with that being said, guys, thank you all so much, and we'll catch you all on the next episode. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, man.
On the track.